Hello, World Wide Web. Welcome back to the Hanging with Web show right here on HWWS Web TV. I'm GW Pomichter, and we are at Space Coast Comic-Con this weekend, having a great time. Right now, we are hanging out with author Edward Wysocki, the author of Out of This World Ideas.
Right.
Out of This World Ideas. Ed, how are you, man? Thanks for coming and hanging out with us
Nice
today.
to have me.
How are you?
Doing pretty good.
Yeah? Welcome to Space Coast Comic-Con.
Thank you.
This is where the crazy making happens.
I can see.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, Edo, let's start it with Out of This World Ideas. Okay, we've got a copy here, Out of This World Ideas, guys. We're going to put links down below so that you can check it out online. Give us the book blurb on this, man. Tell us what we should look forward to in Out of This World Ideas.
Well, many people claim that various inventions have been inspired by science fiction. You can go online and you see these pages that say, these 10 or 12 inventions have been inspired by science fiction. When you go down the line, however, of this, and you look at each one, it's like, no, maybe, no. The people who make these claims just don't do the research into what's actually behind them. They go by the similarity of appearance
Of the object, yes.
of the object. They say, oh, it looks the same, so it must be inspired by it.
And in all honesty, in a lot of cases, great inventors, great thinkers are not always great marketers. And so oftentimes it's someone else that comes in and says, you know, that bears a striking resemblance to this. It's a great marketing tool.
Right.
Kind of like us. We'll sit at the keyboard and bang out 80,000 words, but then you got to sell it to somebody.
Exactly.
So
This book actually comes from my first book, which looked at a claim by Robert Heinlein, the science fiction author, that one of his early stories contained something that one of his Naval Academy classmates turned into a real naval system. And that original book, The Great Heinlein Mystery, was just a story of my trying to figure out what it is. But in the course of that, I said to myself, here's somebody claiming that a science fiction story has actually influenced something real. Were there any other cases? And I found a few, and I just mentioned them in passing in the first book. And then a little later on, I said, maybe I should research those a little more and make it a book of their own.
that's fantastic, man. So in your research, right, what was the most unusual origin story that you found for a big idea that had been previously credited to science fiction? What stands out in your mind as one of the most unusual or striking?
Well, I think the most interesting one.
And also keep in mind, I think everybody out there on the internet, oftentimes writers cannot help but be, we are also citizens of the world. So a writer may be influenced by an idea that's floating around out there. We'll write a story, we'll create an object or an idea, and then later when the idea comes to fruition, we're taking credit for it. Oh, that was my thing that I did in my story. But the reality is my roommate in college or somebody mentioned this idea to me, and it dug in, and I created something from it, and they created something different.
Well, the other problem is when you have an idea come out and it's too far in advance of the technology of the time. So it might be 20 or 30 years before somebody can actually build this device. Then you get a real problem in showing where the person actually got the inspiration from. Most of the ones I found is somebody with a particular exact story, and some inventor read that story and took that idea and ran with that idea right from the book. Now the most interesting one, and I have in here, is there's a device called a Drac Horn.
A Drac Horn.
Drac Horn. Drac Horn is a flexible barge you tow behind a ship. So if you're taking oil or something out to an island, instead of pulling this big heavy steel barge behind you, you pump this sausage up with the stuff, tow it behind you. When you get done, you roll the sausage up and throw it on the ship and bring it back.
That's pretty cool.
And there's a British engineer, degrees from Cambridge, Dr. Science from MIT. His name was William Hawthorne. And he read Under Pressure by Frank Herbert.
Okay.
Where the idea was the Western powers are stealing oil from the Eastern powers. The submarine goes in, drills into the oil deposit, pumps it out to this long, flexible thing that's towed behind the submarine.
Ah.
Then about a year later was the Suez Crisis when the canal was closed and the British had a shortage of tankers. So he puts it all together and comes with this idea.
That's kind of cool.
But he had to do a lot of development work because they were coming.
Oh, yeah. I will be the first one to admit that as a fiction writer, I will come up with an idea and paint you a picture of this wonderful object without having any idea exactly how it works. If you want to build one, you got a lot of math to do because I haven't done any of it.
Well, it actually works in reverse because there's a quote attributed to Murray Leinster, Will Jenkins, who was an inventor on the side. And he said that he would come up with an idea for a real invention, turn it around in his mind, trying all the ins and outs to make it work. If he couldn't make it work, he'd use it in the stories.
I like that.
He had
because in fiction, the primary goal is to get our audiences to suspend their disbelief temporarily for the length of 80,000 words or 100,000 words, or if you're George Martin, 500 million words. But we just want you to suspend your disbelief for a little while. It doesn't have to work forever.
Exactly.
But in the world, it's got to work, or we can't sell it, or we can't manufacture it, or whatever. So, in your topic is one that is intensely research heavy.
Yes.
And writers are researchers. We want to know a little bit about everything. You're a student of life when you're a writer because you got to know a little bit about everything. What was the most interesting thing that you found in your research? Interesting little tidbit that we can kind of tease them with so they can go back and try to find it in your writing.
Well, let me see. There's this story of the chain reaction, nuclear chain reaction. There's a physicist named Leo Szilard, and he was in Germany, and he decided to get out of Germany. The Nazis had taken over, and he has been saving up money. He's got money in his suitcase and stuff, and buys a one-way train ticket from Berlin to Vienna, and gets on the train. He falls asleep. He gets to the border. They wake him up, and the guy's looking at his papers. Well, it says he's a mid-30s. He's well dressed. He's traveling first class. He's on the paper says he's on the University of Berlin. So they didn't search his bags. He says, "Have a nice trip. Let him through." The next day, all the trains were loaded with people trying to get out of Germany, and they were turned back, and their luggage was searched and everything. He made it out.
Wow.
And he always joked about that. He says, "It shows you don't have to be smarter than everybody else, just a day earlier."
Just a day before that. And on that note, guys, that's fantastic. What do we got over here? She's got, all right, so when you were looking through here, there are hundreds of thousands of patents and inventions, and some that we know, some that we don't. How did you pick things that you wanted to research and things that you wanted to include in your out-of-this-world ideas?
It was mainly coming across claims that other people had made.
Okay.
And like you said, you've got this incredibly large amount of inventions, and you got all these ideas in science fiction stories, and the intersection between the two is so microscopically small. Just digging around at random trying to find it. So I've got to depend on other people to come to me and say, "Well, have you heard about this one? Have you heard about this? Somebody said this was inspired," and then
you just dive into it. See where it takes you, huh? Which is always an adventure, by the way. The research in writing is so much fun because you don't actually know where it's going to take you.
Exactly.
And that's amazing. Guys, we've been hanging out with Edward Wysocki. I keep trying to pronounce that right. Edward Wysocki is the author of Out of This World Ideas. You can check it out. We're going to put links down below so you can find it on Amazon and all the other great book places online. In the meantime, we're going to thank our partners and friends at NSC Live TV, Mommy and G Creations, Brevard Film and Talent, J. Bauer Art for all the art that's on our set this weekend, Hearts Helping Others of Central Florida, Famous Faces and Funnies, and of course all of you for subscribing, and our great friends over at Screech Dragon Gaming. Guys, thank you. Hit subscribe. Come back over and over again to see who we're hanging with next. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank
man.
you.
That's awesome.